following program has been rated GE. It is therefore suitable for general viewing.
Hello and welcome to another edition of We Debate. I'm Joe Munene. Now, the impact of foreign aid on Africa's development, especially in the post-colonial years, has been the subject of vibrant debate over the years. Has foreign aid served Africa well? Do African nations still need foreign aid, or is the continent better off pursuing alternative pathways and solutions to her development? This is good for debate.
The debate motion for tonight, let it be resolved. Africa still needs foreign aid to achieve her full socio-economic potential. Our debaters for tonight are, on the affirmative side of the debate we have Dr. Solomon Jenga, governance and policy expert. On the negative side of the motion we have Dr. Alex Manyasi, governance and policy expert.
Dr. Solomon Jenga, Alex, welcome to this debate session. The motion for debate, let it be resolved, Africa still needs foreign aid to achieve her full socio-economic potential. Solomon, you're arguing on the affirmative side of the debate, i.e. you are supporting that motion. Alex, you stand in opposition. We will start with 1 minute opening remarks. You will each get a chance to give your opening remarks. That will be followed by 5 minutes, starting with the affirmative side. Solomon, 5 minutes to make your main presentation. After the second 5 minutes presentation, we'll have a rebuttal session where you respond to each other's arguments. Now, as part of the format of the debate, we have a panel of jurors, 3 members of the jury panel who will be listening in and evaluating on your respective arguments.
On the jury panel, we have Juror 1, Kidi Mwaga, political analyst. Juror 2, Buka Ngesa Omole, public policy analyst. Juror 3, Oyeyo Onchari, founder and CEO, Center for African Politics, CAP.
Prior to the start of the debate, we have polled the jurors to ascertain where they stand on this motion. And Solomon, you have a lot of work to do because all the jurors are against the motion. They do not believe that we still need aid. At the end of the debate, we will poll the jurors again to see whether you've been successful in convincing them to your side of the motion, and whether, Alex, you've been able to hold on to the 3 jury members. So to quickly start off, we start on the affirmative side. Solomon, your 1 minute opening statement.
Thank you so much. My name is Solomon, and I strongly believe that Africa is in need of foreign aid. This is an argument that is not popular because many people believe that Africa has grown to the level of they don't want financial aid. But let me ask you a question. A country or a continent that has 75% level of poverty in 2020, according to the World Bank. Years back, over 30 years ago, poverty level was only 10%. Today, poverty level has grown up to 75%. And therefore someone will argue, we don't need foreign aid and you are poor. How can you choose whether to live or not and say that you don't want foreign aid? I am strongly convicted that Africa is in need of foreign aid. Statistics don't lie.
Statistics don't lie. Alex, your 1 minute opening statement.
Indeed, numbers don't lie. Africa does not need foreign aid. That's my stand as at now. Why I say that is because if you read, for example, in her book, Dead Aid, by Dambisa Moyo of 2009, she actually says that poverty in Africa rose from 11% to 66% between 1970 and 1998, when foreign aid for the continent was highest. That's a confirmation And that is what we will be debating, that something is wrong about us receiving foreign aid.
Thank you, Alex. We now come back to you, Solomon. You have 5 minutes to make your presentation.
Thank you so much. I strongly believe that Africa is still in need of foreign aids. This concept has been distorted in Africa to the extent that everyone feels that we don't need foreign aid. But if you allow me to go back to the history, foreign international aid is how wealthier nations share with poor nations. That is the concept. And this concept is founded on the concept of sharing, which is inherently in us. Globally, we believe that it's good to share with those who don't have. Sharing is a global phenomenon that is founded on this concept of international aid. It is the concept of those who have share with those who don't in the society. If you look at the history, the concept was positive. Africa had just come out of colonialism, and the infrastructure wasn't that good. Both roads, ports, etc., etc. And in good faith, the Western nations decided to give, whether in soft loan, gift, or in finances, or in kind, to help Africa rebuild from post-colonialism. In the 19th century, this is as old as almost 100 years, even today. Building economies. The US, even today, is still helping nations to build economies. Germany, France, and Britain, they are still helping Africa to rebuild economies. Foreign aid is actually something that has evidence of changing lives and infrastructure. In early 1960s, countries like Malaysia, Korea, Indonesia, and Thailand were having 70% foreign funding, and they made use of it. Now, Germany, France, they are now giving into Africa. Africa is poor. Look at the diseases, killer diseases. The measles, smallpox, polio, hepatitis B is killing Africa. 15 million Kenyans are using ARVs through foreign aid. The BCG, the vaccination that I believe all of us here have a scar on their left hand, that's an indication of the vaccination that you went when you were young. And that was through foreign aid. And even today, over 48 million Kenyans currently are vaccinated by the BCG, polio, and all this is through the foreign aid. COVID-19, 19 million Kenyans have been vaccinated by the help of foreign aid. That is in record MOH data. Poverty in Kenya, 10 million Kenyans currently are on starvation. And then you tell me that we don't need foreign aid. What a big lie. Approximately 30% of Kenyans are facing starvation with no food, water. That is ILO data. And it's evidence over there. Security budget. Approximately in the Kenya budget, 2021-2022 budget, they were given, the security department were given 294 billion to be shared by the defense, NIS, police, and prison against a budget of over 500 billion. That means they were given half of their budget. Now, if you say that Kenya and Africa don't need foreign aid, then Africa will continue to be poor. Actually, the data by World Bank states that by 2030, chances are that Africa might actually be on the percentage of 90% poor. Then, how can you tell me that Africa has grown? Irrespective of corruption, irrespective of the idea of dumping of products, that good idea of sharing should not be anchored on corruption. As a matter of fact, corruption is a management issue that can be wiped out if we completely agree that Africa is in need of foreign aid.
Solomon there making a strong case on why we need foreign aid. Alex, your opportunity to do your 5-minute presentation.
Let me start by saying that if you think about the issue of foreign aid, and in my opening statement, I said that between 1970 and 1998, when aid for Africa was highest, that is when our challenges began, and poverty levels rose from 11% to 6%. And let me tell you now, having looked at that, what aid does. Number one, what aid does is that it comes with conditions. And so aid skews your policy direction in terms of how you think as a country and as a continent. So you abandon your own ideas about what you need to do to grow and start embracing what people think is important for you. What other countries need is not necessarily what Africa needs. What Europe needs is not what Africa needs. So when you skew your policies to the direction of what the aid, where aid is coming from, then you start focusing on the wrong things. If you're living in 2022 and someone is telling you to focus on things that are 1960, then that is part of where challenges are. For example, if I just give a specific example, we've had infrastructure on the continent which is technically obsolete. So what happens is that we pick up things that have been dumped on the other part of the world, and we decide that because we are accepting aid, then that is what we need, when in actual sense that's not what we need. There's no foreign country that will give you aid so that you can compete them and outmaneuver them. And therefore it means, for as long as you receive aid from a certain entity, you will always receive aid that will never make you better than them or like them. Secondly, what foreign aid does, again, it comes with conditions. And one of the conditions is what has led to the exploitation of Africa in terms of natural resources. More than half of the African continent's resources, natural resources, the world resources, are actually on this continent. That's partly why we have countries like Congo still asking for foreign aid. Why? It's because some people have decided that Congo must remain the way it is so that it can continue receiving aid, so that then other people may continue exploiting their resources. Thirdly, as long as we continue receiving foreign aid, our capacity will never grow. What do I mean by that? We will always be begging for resources while we are not building our capacity. But on the other hand, the few experts that we have are moving to the countries that are giving us aid because they are the ones who understand this continent, are being used as resources for purposes of exploiting Africa more. If you look at the global entities that work with Africa, that give us money, most of the people behind the technology, behind the manpower, actually come from this continent. And that is what is perpetuating the entire lack of equity between Africa and the rest of the world. Standing here, I work for a Pan-African organization. What we do, we believe that it's about Africa, for Africa, by Africans. So what we do is that we do research on this continent, We are supposed to resolve the problems and challenges of this continent ourselves, because we know for sure that there's no one who has the best interests in Africa apart from Africans themselves. What we need to do now, and I know that we'll get into that debate, is partnerships. We do not need foreign aid, we need partnerships. Africa does not need Europe. Europe needs Africa more than Africa needs it. If we closed our borders today, for instance, most of the industries and the jobs in the West will close.
Thank you, Alex. Solomon, your response, your opportunity to rebut to Alex's positions there.
Thank you so much. I have listened to my colleague, Alex, and really, I am shocked by his statement that every foreign aid is given on condition. That's a fallacy and need to be corrected. I don't believe that every gift, every donation that is given is based on the conditions. I don't think so. Because really, some of these gifts are actually mutual agreement. And the fallacy again is Africa don't give to the developed countries with our own vulnerability. If you remember, in the year 2011, September, when there was bombing in America, Maasais from South Kenya gave 14 cows to the Americans. Now, the assumption is that they don't need help or foreign aid. Let me also tell you that even America and developed countries are also depending, to some extent, those not compared to Africa, on foreign aid. And this is a globalization era where mutuality relationship is required and has been demonstrated. I strongly believe that the concept of dumping in the pretext of donation and foreign aid can be regulated by good policies. Who has refused Africans to remain firm with their policies and say no to dumping, no to manipulation? It is our own misgiving, it is our own problems that we need to sort out, and not to put missiles on the foreign aid. Because the concept, we have evidence. Look at Rwanda. Rwanda, Mozambique, and Ethiopia. You can check in data on record. They have developed so fast because of foreign aid. What is the difference? Is the management and stewardship and leadership. They are not attacking the foreign aid, but they are saying, let it come because we need it. That's a reality. So on our side, we need to practice good leadership, good governance, but not to put missiles on foreign aid. Look at the roads that we are building here in Kenya. Name them. Name those roads that we are building.
Okay.
Almost 50% or 60% is actually foreign aid. Why are they going that way? It's because we need them. And they also need us.
Okay. Alex, your opportunity to respond to what you heard so far.
Let me respond to the allegations that my brother has been making around foreign aid. Like I said initially, what foreign aid does is that it comes with conditions, that's for sure. All of us know, for example, that there's no aid that we have gotten that we have not signed for, that has said, for example, for you to access this amount, this is what you need to do. And by the time you exhaust 50% for you to get the next batch of disbursement, then this is what you need to do. So there are conditions for all the foreign aid that we get. That's a fact. But however, I want to mention a few things. For example, we need to be curious about why, for example, foreign entities will always be interested in security, in health, and in education. There are very specific reasons why. It's because they also have interests in those sectors. And therefore, if it's education, for example, they want to skew the way you do your learning in the way that they want you to learn, not the way you think you should learn. In terms of health, for instance, they want to understand the dynamics of health in your country, not because they want you to be very healthy, but because they want to control how your health systems run. And why I'm saying that is because, for instance, right now with COVID-19, the West, for example, realized that if you do not control how Africans behave and they do things, Africa is becoming a threat to the world if there are pandemics on this continent. And therefore, anything that they're going to do in the near future is going to be skewed around how do you control populations around Africa. For example, there's a fear in Nigeria, for example. The West fears that in the next few years, in every 3 Africans, 1 will be a Nigerian. And that is a threat to Europe because Africans are not growing the continent enough, and therefore Africans are migrating to Europe and other places and not migrating within Africa. So unless we grow Africa, as long as we depend on Europe, the Europeans are also realizing that the challenge that they have right now is Africans moving to them. What is a bit baffling to me is that they have not realized that the aid they have been giving, which has been skewed in their interest, is now working against them. So it's about time that also start thinking otherwise.
Maybe before we take a break, how would you say, how is the aid working against them?
It's because aid has been used for a long time to skew the African continent in terms of education, in terms of health, in terms of poverty management. And so they thought that you keep Africans poor, let them die of diseases, let them be poor, and therefore you can manage them. What they are not now realizing is that democracy is also growing on their end. And therefore Africans are moving to Europe instead. So that's a problem because as we know right now, you will know that Europe and America have challenges which are political. And the political challenges they currently have is how do they manage their so-called democracy when Africans are even becoming leaders in Europe and America. We know for sure, like the UK Prime Minister today is not originally UK. Barack Obama has been president in the US. There's a lot of unsettled Americans because the democracy that they tried to create at home is now coming to bite them. If they had stood with Africa to develop this continent, then Africans will not be thinking about going to the US or to Europe for them to gain livelihood.
Solomon, just 20 seconds before we take a break.
Let me say this. Conditions, even in exams, we are given instructions. Conditions are not necessarily evil. From where I stand, conditions here on matters of our foreign aid is to tame African appetite on grafts and corruption. And if it serves the purpose, I will even call for more conditions. If that condition will produce, and this is my argument, it is because we need to ask ourselves how these foreign aids are provided, the motives behind it, what is used for. And these are some of the things that we need to start scrutinizing. So my position still remains that Africa is in need of foreign aid.
We are at the halfway mark of this debate. In the second half, we'll have questions and answers. The role of the jurors will kick in. And prior to that, we'll have given the debaters an opportunity to cross-examine each other. So we'll start with Alex. You'll have a chance to ask 1 or 2 questions and the same. Then we'll pick the jurors. We take a short break. We'll be right back.
feedback and welcome any comments, queries, or complaints regarding our programs. You can get in touch with us on SMS 22151, no charges. Call 0719 012450. Or you can send us a letter on Post Office Box 30080-00100. Or deliver it to our offices at Standard Group Center, Mombasa Road, Nairobi.
Wewe umecheza mara ngapi?
Kwa siku mara 3 ama 4 hivi. Bwana sema 3 ama 4.
Ulishinda kivipi?
Mimi natumanga hiyo namba 77000.
Yes.
Hiyo ndio natumanga. Kila siku mara 3 hivi, 2 hivi.
Yes.
Hiyo ndio huwa natuma.
Ulimatch hizo namba?
Nikamatch hizo namba, baadaye nikaambiwa nimeshinda
200,000. Ulicheza na pesa ngapi?
200.
Unafanya kazi gani?
Mimi napakanga rangi.
Umeipangia namna gani 200,000?
Kwanza ni kusomeza watoto wako, hiyo ingine ni kuongeza job ikuwe sawa. Ndoto ni ukweli.
Yes. Angalia pale.
Bora ujaribu.
Yes.
Na ujaribu ukijua hata kama utashinda, utasaidia mwenzako. Na bora siku yako inakuja hata
Over 18s only. Gaming can be addictive. Play responsibly. This message has been approved by the BCLB.
Changamka, cheza Loto.
To protect our family from germs that cause illness when it's cold, we use Dettol soap.
Dettol soap with germ defense gives you protection. When it's cold, germs are transferred in different ways, and Dettol soap's germ defense protects you from up to 100 illness-causing germs. Be Dettol.
Global Peace Foundation Kenya and Standard Group PLC, in partnership with the Kenya Private Schools Association KPSA, Center for Mathematics, Science and Technology Education in Africa Semester, UNICAF Kenya, Plan International, Al Khair Foundation, Moringa School and Opinion Track Limited will be hosting the 3rd edition of the Great Places to School Awards Gala Dinner. The gala will be held on Friday, 27th January 2023 from 6 p.m. to 10:40 p.m. East African Time at Sarova Pan-Africa Hotel, Nairobi. You can be part of the awards gala dinner by taking a corporate table or paying for individual tickets or booking an exhibition booth. For more details, please contact Maureen Kemunto on 0715-497859 or Sami Karanja on 0721-751548 or Evans Chelimo on 0725-831024 for more details. For more information about the initiative, please visit our website www.greatplacestoschool.com. Great Places to School Initiative, where innovative learning is.
Are you in a season where you feel things are thick? This week, we talk about seasons of hardship and how to stay positive during that season. Stay tuned for a fan-packed show with your favorite Friday squad of Ben Cycle, Nyawere Gashugi, and DJ Sean K.E. on Friday Turn Up from 10:30 p.m.
Everything is possible, God
What else?
Work. Work's over. Busy biters, get down to snack business. When snacking is under attack, we'll be there to fight back.
Welcome back to the debate. We are debating foreign aid and whether Africa still needs it. In this second part of the debate, we start with cross-examination. Solomon, your opportunity to ask a question.
I would want to ask my colleague whether he still feels that we can still build roads, institutions, or institutional capacities, and even education. As a matter of fact, if ARVs is removed from the plate of foreign aid in Kenya, those struggling with HIV and AIDS will completely be disadvantaged. The question is, how is our country prepared if all foreign aid is pulled out?
I think I'll answer my brother in this way. He's given the Kenyan context, and I will use that as an example. During the Kibaki time, we said that we didn't borrow much, and yet we developed most. So that's a confirmation in one end that you do not need to borrow and get aid for you to develop. Secondly, we have had this for a long time, and all of us know that 30% of our money disappears through corruption. Another 30%, which is another third, is mismanaged. And then we use a third to do our thing. And therefore, you tell me, if your deficit in the budget is not even 2/3 of your budget, and yet 2/3 of your budget is already lost, that means you actually don't need the money that you're looking for. The money that we have and raise here is enough for us to prioritize what we think is important for us. Do we think, for example, that the education system that we have is good for us, or we need to change it? We prioritize. Do we think that our health system that we have is enough for us or not? Then we prioritize that. The resources that we collect is enough, given the examples I've given about the third that we lose through corruption and the 1/3 that we lose by mismanagement, and it's only 1/3. So how do you, given if you're in a home, you buy one loaf of bread, you cut 1/3 of it, you throw it outside, and then you cut another 1/3, and then you step on it, and then decide to borrow 2/3 from your neighbor so that you can have a loaf of bread to eat. To me, it still baffles me how that mathematics still makes sense.
Okay, so in your viewpoint, we can do away with the foreign aid, keeping in mind the definition that we had, because you still have borrowings. You can go and borrow from the market, the way the Kibaki administration largely went.
Currently, there's no evidence that we have managed our resources to a point where we need to borrow. There's no evidence yet. So we need to manage the resources that we have properly before we can ever think about borrowing. Before we do that, I do not think that we are at a point where, because the thing is, the money that we are borrowing is coming to perpetuate the same problems that we have. And these are, we keep, let me not say stealing. We keep taking away the 1/3, and we keep mismanaging the other 1/3, so that we can continue borrowing. If there was no borrowing, for example, our leaders will be very careful what they do with the resources that we collect from the citizens. And the citizens will be so careful to ask where their money is going. But as long as we are borrowing and we're mismanaging, that equation will never balance.
Monene, there is no country in this world that doesn't borrow.
Yeah, and I think
so. The question, the issue,
the distinction needs to be: we are talking about foreign aid,
yes,
where there are grants, there are soft loans.
Agreed.
But the aspect of borrowing, that you can go to the international market and borrow, you can go to the domestic market, and a lot of that happens. So I want us to have those two as two distinct
agreed
aspects.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And my position still remains. Let me say this: corruption that he is talking about is a management issue. That does not negate the fact that we still need foreign aid.
Foreign aid.
I wanted to make that very clear.
Okay.
As we talk today, over 10 million Kenyans today are under starvation. With the corruption, they are still dying and so forth because they don't have anything. So someone standing and saying that let Kenya continue dying because we are corrupt in the expense of those who are suffering on starvation, that's a fallacy.
The reason why Kenyans are suffering today is because we have decided that we don't have homegrown solutions to our problems. That needs to start happening. We need to fix our own problems, and that way we will not need anyone to come and fix it for us with conditions on the monies that they give us. No.
We cross the floor. We will start at the far end with Onchari. Indicate the person to whom your question is directed to. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Monene. Thank you so much, Dr. Solomon and Alex. Wonderful presentation, and I like the delivery you made. Of course, you've produced so many fallacies, and I want to ask you, the first question I want to ask is this. You said something about aid and cooperation, and I think you agreed with my friend over here. There's a very big difference between aid and cooperation. If Kenya, for example, is working closely with the United States in the fight against corruption, that is cooperation, it's not aid. I think I'd like us to have that distinction very, very clear. Now, you're saying Africa is poor. That is a statement you made about 6-7 times. On what parameters are you classifying Africa as poor? Because when I was going through my data, Nigeria is number 6 in production of oil, crude oil. DRC is number 1 in the production of coltan that is used for the manufacture of mobile phones and laptops. And so when you move from country to country in Africa, you find huge deposits of what? Very precious minerals. You go to Sierra Leone, you'll find diamond, okay? So when you say Africa is poor, what are you basing that on? DRC in itself as a country is bigger than Western Europe, all the countries of Western Europe. And every inch of DRC is covered with lots and lots of precious minerals. So on what grounds are you saying Africa is poor? So that is the question, the first question. Second question is this. Are you defending aid because it's legitimate? Are you defending aid because it's needed? You know, like I said earlier, when you're training a kid how to walk, at first you'll hold the kid's hand, and then you know the kid will make some 3-4 steps. And if you want the kid to learn how to walk, you let the kid cover some distance on its own. Of course, you told me you have to make sure your eyes are on the kid, just in case, he or she tumbles and falls. But for the kid to be able to learn to walk, you have to let the kid take steps. So, since independence, most African countries have been getting aid. Talk about Equatorial Guinea, talk about Guinea-Bissau, all of them, including Kenya here. So are we going to keep getting aid until eternity just because aid is acceptable? At some point, we actually have to say, enough is enough, we have resources, let's learn to develop. You look at the Marshall Plan in 1948, which was given to Europe after the devastation, after the Second World War. And that was the end of aid to Europe. They got to learn how to keep their stuff together, and they've made progress. So for how long is Africa going to argue that we should get aid?
I'd want to put some things straight. One, I still hold the opinion that Africa is poor.
Okay.
Compared to the other 5 continents. As a matter of fact, you can cross-check this, that Africa is the poorest continent in the world. Whether we have gold in Congo, whether we have whatever we have in Kenya, the total aggregate compared with the developed countries, Africa is trailing. Secondly, when it comes to the issue of making sure that Africa doesn't depend from foreign aid, the concept of climate change is cross-border. And it's affecting America, Britain, Kenya, and Africa. When you travel to those countries, you'll also know that our infrastructure are extremely low compared. I will tell you this. In the US, the budget for security and other things is about 40%, over 40% security. Here in Africa, the security that we are talking, or the infrastructure that we are talking about, is shared among many others. Education, health, and so many other things. Meaning that we are not better off compared with them. And I want to say this, that the sole purpose of the foreign aid is to uplift human life. Is human life uplifting required in Africa? The answer is yes. And if you follow that argument, then if foreign aid is to uplift human life, let it be. The other thing that foreign aid assists in is to boosting economic development. You will realize that through organizations, NGOs, and through government, multilateral and bilateral agreements between governments and between, a group of governments, they are helping Africa. And I mentioned this again with the issue of drugs that are like Corona, for information. And I believe all of us, we went through the process of COVID-19 and people are dying. But those people, because they are technologically advanced compared to Africa, whether it's a fact or not, that's a fact. Technologically, we are a bit wobbling compared. What will make Western or foreign aid, why would we not do a collaboration and capacity building? And when you narrow all this, it becomes financial aspect. You cannot do capacity building without finances.
There was a bit about the distinction between aid and cooperation. Do you want to speak to that?
I will say this. There is no foreign aid without cooperation. The argument is on mutuality. We want to uplift human life. And therefore, to me, the difference between foreign aid and cooperation, it's not that big. Foreign aid has the idea 100% of cooperation in uplifting life and strengthening institutions.
Something, Mr. Munene?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so we have, like I pointed out in the fight against terror, the Americans come in with advanced machines. They assist us in monitoring Al-Shabaab in Somalia and other places. Then they tell us, do what, send your troops here and take them out. So, we do something, they do something. That is cooperation, in my view. And then we have aid, whereby you get some, maybe 10 billion shillings from France, for instance. It goes to the fight against AIDS, to Kenya, right? So there's a difference in that area. So cooperation means you give something, they give something, and then you tackle a problem, you solve a problem. Aid basically means you receive something, right? That is the distinction I'm trying to get from you, if you agree with me.
I think my position still remains.
Okay.
There is no foreign aid without cooperation.
Okay.
And therefore, that should be factored in.
Don't you think you contradict yourself? You said aid does not come with conditions, and I said that. I think that cooperation
I said conditions are not necessarily evil. Corporations have also conditions.
Now, and he told you when you accept aid, basically what it means, you have to dance to the tune of the person giving you aid. You pays the piper, calls the tune.
That is a wrong argument, because why are you making conditions evil?
Do you remember in 1991?
No, let me finish.
Okay.
don't demonize conditions.
I agree.
And therefore, I agree that where there is foreign aid, conditions are important. As a matter of fact, it is crucial.
So that is a closed argument.
Okay. Yes.
Foreign aid comes with conditions.
Yeah.
Okay. And just to advance on that just a little bit, when the aid comes with conditions, like in 1991, 1992, when Musalia Mudavadi was finance minister, I think he was appointed by Moi on the demand of the World Bank. I think it was meant to restructure our monetary system, our economy, to make sure money is not lost and that kind of stuff. So people lost jobs. We did things we're not even willing to do. So don't you think these conditions sometimes can be harsh to the recipients of aid?
There is what we call, there is a very thin line between faith and foolishness. I'm not biblical, but I will want to draw a point of Abraham and the son. But let me tell you, there is a very thin dichotomy. There is a very thin line between conditions. Conditions are there to help, and to some extent, if we have the history of Africans, look at the Golden Bag. Look at the major corruption that have happened in Kenya. I strongly believe, and I still stand on this. Cooperation is important. Conditions are not necessarily evil.
Okay. Maybe the question I would ask Solomon is, are there conditions in your view that have worked against African countries?
I will say this, like he has given an example. There are so many, like when you are making conditions, it's give and take.
Yeah.
It's give and take. And I will not stand here and itemize the conditions, but I will want to say this on the global, on the general level.
They're not necessarily bad, but they're those that work against the interests.
Yes, and that is why I strongly believe that capacity building is important, so that when they are talking about technology, we have our own experts in technology. And this is my problem. Even in the government today, they are sending those who are the ministers. We don't look at the qualifications and experience. And this is where the conditions from the foreign states or nations come into play. Because I am not, if I'm the CS of an environment, and completely I don't have the background on environment, which conditions will I put forth? And that is why the Western, they're also not fools. They sometimes sneak in for their own benefit.
Expertise be better placed with different pathways of negotiating? For example, trade, the trade policies that we have. As opposed to foreign aid, we go to the WTO and argue and put forward our interests, as opposed to saying give us aid. So maybe just a context around the conditions.
But aid is not evil. Why are you running away from the aid?
Let me just make...
I know I'm against 7.
Alex, you have 15 seconds exactly. I need to move it.
A quick comment. Every time you receive aid, it doesn't matter how qualified you are. As long as the person that is receiving is disadvantaged in terms of the receiving itself.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how qualified you are, you'll always get conditions. And if you don't agree to the conditions, you will not even receive the aid in the first place.
Aids are not given under duress. Let us be clear on that. Okay. Aids are not given under duress. So I disagree with him.
All right. Buka Omole?
Well, thank you very much. I have a few questions. Most of them are for Dr. Solomon, but one for Manyasi. You've given an example of Rwanda, which is entirely over-dependent on aid. And you've given a scenario that if it were not for aid, where will Rwanda be? My question to you is that if African countries continue to depend on foreign aid, don't you think that makes them even more vulnerable to exploitations from the aid givers? And it basically means that if 90% of our budget in terms of health depends on certain foreign governments, one morning we can wake up and we cannot sustain our health care. And I can give you an examples. When sanctions were given for Zimbabwe, when Zimbabwe was depending on aid, and in 2 weeks, they were not able to get that aid, you can imagine how devastating it is. So I'm looking at aid as an overdependence and making Africa more vulnerable. So in that case, if we continue to get aid, then secondly, you've given the history of colonial Africa. Now, it's not only Africans that were colonized. In fact, China suffered the most brutal colonization for many years. And now, China is competing with one of the world's superpowers. The trajectory that the Chinese people did was to develop their internal productive forces and be able to control it, of course, under the leadership of Chairman Mao. Now, in Kenya, just as many other Asian countries, India, look at them, that continue to depend on aid. My question to you was, which country has developed because of our independence of aid? Even Indonesia, as you give it today, when we're talking about development, are you talking about development for the people or development for the minority? Maybe before my time is up, Manyasi, there's one phrase you mentioned, Africa for Africans. Does it negate your argument? You're saying that aid is only bad because the white man is giving him, or aid is bad all through? Because you said we want Africans to help Africans. So if we are getting, for example, now Morocco, is giving us aid through fertilizer, but fertilizer is gotten from the occupied territory of Western Sahara. So in actual sense, is aid bad in itself in terms of, Africa helping Africans and Europe helping Europe, or how do you advance your argument?
All right, we start with Solomon. Let's keep it crisp.
Thank you so much, my panelist. It's a question that we need to understand the whole picture of foreign aid. The point is, can foreign aid produce overdependency? From where I stand, the answer is yes. Should we say that we don't need foreign aid because there is overdependency? I will say no. That is my position. And you quoted Rwanda, where I have been. But I would want to mention this. I mentioned Rwanda in good light of financial management of foreign aids. We have worse scenarios, because even where I come from, we say that a mother can give birth to a pastor and a thief. There is always a good and the negative side of it. And my point is this: foreign aid is required in Africa, whether there is overdependence or not. Overdependence is now the management, and where we need to ask ourselves, to what extent is foreign aid managing our policies, our politics, our infrastructural development? And if we reach a point where we are being muzzled, I think it's the high time Africa should rise up and say no. Not to foreign aid, because every country in Africa is under foreign aid.
Part of the question was any example of African countries that have thrived as a result of foreign aid?
Rwanda, I mentioned Rwanda.
Okay.
Yeah.
The China example?
In which sense?
In the sense that China was colonized as many African countries as well, but seemed to have looked internally and gotten itself out of that dependence on foreign aid.
In project management, there is, and governance, there is what we call benchmarking. We can take China as a benchmarking. What did they do that we are not doing, so that we can be where they are, probably in the years to come?
Okay.
Look at the economy of Malaysia. I'm told, and I'm informed, that the economy of Malaysia compared with Kenya in the years back, we were far much ahead of them. But Malaysia, in history and even in record, they completely decided to take the foreign aid cautiously and in management. And they tried to maneuver the whole concept. And now Malaysia is way ahead of GDP, infrastructure, and everything compared to Kenya. So there is always good side and the bad side. There is life, which is good side, and there is death.
So which would almost be leaning towards what Alex was saying, that there are these other options, these things we need to fix, as opposed to looking at foreign aid.
Those are internal, but they do not negate the fact. And that is my point of departure.
Okay, that we still need aid.
Completely.
Okay.
So first of all, before I respond to that, if you look at Rwanda, the example that my brother has been giving, if you rank Rwanda in terms of countries that are developed, even on this continent, it's not among them. So let's just be clear about that. But secondly, building the capacity of Africans to deal with their own problems, it's what I meant. So we do not need someone to come and give us aid and give us conditions that are skewed to their favor. So we need to fix our own problems, fix our own resources, deal with our own resources, build our own capacity, and do partnerships instead. Thank you.
Okay. Final juror, Kidi Mwaga.
Thank you very much, Munene. I have a couple of questions, a couple to my friend, Dr. Solomon. And I have one reserved for Alex Manyasi, the traditional medicine. That is a translation of your name where I come from. Now, Dr. Solomon, you said that poverty in Africa in the 70s was standing at 11%.
Yes, thereabout.
And that as at 2013, it was standing at 75%.
Currently.
At 75%.
Yes.
And when we are talking about poverty, we are talking about living standards, right? So my question to you in this regard is that what has been the role of foreign, would you apply yourself to the role of foreign aid in disincentivizing accountability and prudence in management of public resources? That is my first question. I have heard you also mention countries like Malaysia and Korea, and I believe you're speaking about South Korea and not North Korea. And so my question is, you say that foreign aid has helped these countries make leaps and bounds in regards to development. I want to put it to you that would you also mind describing in detail the role of erecting inclusive economic institutions in this country as what spurred growth as opposed to foreign aid? I want to ask the last question because I am told time is up, that then you've spoken also on how effective conditions are. And I also want to put it to you that we've seen families of African dictators or rulers having very fat bank account in tax havens. And we all know that the bunch of this money, huge bulk of this money is public coffers, part of it is foreign aid. Would you then speak to how effective then are these conditions if they can place wealth in the hands of so few and leave so many suffering? Okay. Right. Last question to Mr. Alex Manyasi. Would you take a moment to explain in the role of foreign aid in advancement of economic hitmanship? Thank you very much.
Okay, all right. I want to take you through the history. We don't have time, but in summary, you can probably cross-check the history of Malaysia, Korea, Indonesia, and Thailand in 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s. You realize that they relied on foreign aid between 25% to 75%. And therefore, they were able to come out as a good case study. In Africa, it's almost the opposite. Because in early 70s, the percentage was 10% poverty level. 2022 is 75%. By 2030, it's prostrated that it will be over 90%. I think we need to agree and disagree that where there is financial aid, there is also required of financial accountability. And that is what is lacking in Africa. If you compare with other countries, poor management, you mentioned about the offshore account. So, I want to disagree with you completely. Just a minute.
Permit me to interject for a second.
Yes.
That therefore you agree that foreign aid has helped in undermining African institutions because African leaders therefore remain unaccountable to their populace because they know money will come from somewhere.
But that's not 100%. That is not true.
I am putting it to you.
Yeah, that is not true to every country in Africa. I will want to say this. Foreign aid, and I mentioned this, need to come with accountability. However, the givers sometimes, you know the concept of carrots and the stick, where you sing the song so that they can give you. I think that is a fallacy, and that should actually be corrected through good leadership and governance. You mentioned about offshore account. I want to disagree with him that not every offshore account is through corruption.
It's also part investment. I think you've answered the issue of whether the conditions are effective or not.
Conditions?
Yeah.
I will say this. Conditions in Africa, I will not say of all, because there are so many other conditions, but I want to say this, fundamentally, conditions are good.
Okay.
And they should tame
Alex,
our appetite of graft and corruption.
Alex, your response?
I want to finish by responding to what he said as well. I want to use the classic example of Kibera. Kibera is one of the slums in this city. There are more than 1,000 NGOs in Kibera alone. The amount of money that has gone to Kibera in terms of aid is so much that if you were to put it together, you can actually uproot Kibera and take it out and replace with a different city altogether. But that aid has not helped Kibera at all. When the World Bank, for example, told us that the people of Kibera needed housing, they forgot that the Kibera issue was not a housing issue, it was an economic issue. So what happened is they built houses for them, spent money, moved people to those houses. A few months later, people moved out because that is not what they needed. Because they depended on the neighbor to buy their sukuma wiki. You are giving them piped water and electricity which they cannot afford, and they are not used to that kind of lifestyle. So we need to know that we are the ones who are the owners of the problem, and we need to fix it. Someone will not think for us and give us money to offer solutions that are not part of the problems that we have. That's my position.
All right. We need to bring it to a close at this point. Solomon, 1 minute.
Thank you so much.
Closing statement.
My position still remains that Africa is in need of foreign aid, but with this caveat that we need accountability, and we also need conditions that favors us but do not dehumanize the concept of unity in Africa. Kenya is in need of foreign aid, not because it's evil, not because we cannot be able to develop by ourselves, but we also need someone to hold us by the hand, because we are still in a very precarious situation economically.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, Alex, 1 minute flat, your closing statement.
I think my brother has mentioned holding hands many times. He's mentioned that we still need aid many times. But the fact and truth is that we will die being held our hands, unfortunately, for as long as aid keeps trickling in from people who have their own interests. That we need to be clear about. This continent needs to find a way, and countries in this continent need to find a way of fixing their own problems, thinking through them and fixing them through their own ways. The only thing that we need is not aid. What we need is partnerships. We need mutual agreements about the things that we need to do. When we benefit from them, they need to benefit from us. But it cannot be that they are setting conditions on what they need us to do. Why we benefit from aid, but we need to agree that these are the things that we are doing. If they have interest in partnerships and benefiting from them, then they have an agreement with us. Otherwise, we do not need aid.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Solomon. That's it for the debate. We now take the final votes by the jurors. Let us see who has managed to sway the jury team.
At the beginning of the debate, all jurors were against the motion. Have the debaters managed to win over the jurors with their argument?
Well, the jurors' verdict is in, and at the end of this debate on the motion, let it be resolved, Africa still needs foreign aid to achieve her full socio-economic potential. We have an unchanged position. None of the jurors are in agreement with the motion. All the three jury members are still against the motion. Well, that's the position of the jury. Do you back at home agree with it? We welcome your feedback and comments on this debate. Please engage us on the social media handles appearing on your screen right now. Big thank you to our two debaters for a robust and interesting debate. Thank you to the jurors. Thank you to our location host, the Norfolk Hotel. A big thank you to the KTN team behind this production, and of course you, the viewer, for staying tuned and watching this interesting debate. We need to develop Africa. Is it through foreign aid or other pathways? My name is Joe Munene, and I'll see you at the next debate.